Hi, everyone. Not sure about you all, but a lot of that was news to us. So Coretta Scott King's story wasn't nearly as emphasized as Martin Luther King's, and yet without her, as we just learned, we would not be celebrating MLK Day today. So her story, Coretta Scott King's story, was not taught in our schooling. We learned about Martin Luther King every year, but mostly learned about Coretta Scott King as his wife by his side, rather than the instrumental civil rights leader that she was. And after seeing that post that Grace just read, so thank you, Grace, the anti-racism team started to explore and wonder, what other women are we not fully appreciating for their significant mark on the civil rights movement? So we read and we explored, and today we wanted to share a few with you. So our hope is that you might learn something new or deepen some existing appreciation that you have for women who are the backbone of the civil rights movement. For us, something that we were struck by in preparing and researching this is how much these women face tremendous pressure, not only as and bias as Black Americans, but as women in a men's world. It begs the question, how much more could they have accomplished and changed in this country's course if they weren't battling two forms of discrimination? So some people don't pass laws or get national holidays in their name. Rather, they change the moral imagination that makes new realities and laws possible. And when we say moral imagination, we ask when we mean pushing us to see injustices clearly, naming the things we're taught not to name, and making a different future feel possible even when the present feels stuck. So today we wanted to talk about 4 women who did exactly that. So we'll start with Fannie Lou Hamer. So Fannie Lou Hamer wasn't a politician. She wasn't highly educated. She didn't have institutional power. She was a sharecropper in Mississippi, someone the system was designed to keep quiet. And when she tried to register to vote, she was fired from her job, jailed, beaten, and threatened. And at one point, she was beaten so badly in jail that she carried the physical effects of that for the rest of her life. So instead of being quiet about that, she told the truth. In 1964, she testified on national television about what happened to her. Not in legal language or not in policy arguments. She simply told the country what it cost her to try to vote. And then she asked one question: is this America? And that question landed differently than any statistic ever could, because suddenly voter suppression wasn't theoretical. It wasn't procedural. It wasn't something you could just explain away. It became a moral problem. The country could no longer pretend that it didn't know what was happening or who was paying the price. Fannie Lou Hamer didn't pass the Voting Rights Act, but she made it impossible for the country to keep pretending voter protections didn't need to exist. And years later, at her funeral, the United States ambassador to the United Nations said, none of us would be where we are now had she not been there then.
Thanks, Marianna. All right. So the next person I focused on was Diane Nash. Diane grew up in Chicago and was shaped and protected deeply by her grandmother, Carrie Bolton, who believed that prejudice was something taught and passed deliberately from one generation to the next. Diane was shielded from the realities of the unjust times by this belief. The naivete that grew out of that sheltering was finally destroyed when Diane arrived in the South as a college student at Fisk University in Nashville. She collided sharply with reality when, at the Tennessee State Fair, she was required to use a colored bathroom. That moment shocked her. It wasn't just humiliating. It made visible a system that she had been shielded from, and once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. Out of that outrage, Diane Nash became a civil rights activist. But what set her apart was how she turned outrage into disciplined leadership. She became a leader of the Nashville lunch counter sit-ins, which became a model for similar protests in more than 60 cities. She helped lead the Freedom Riders, forcing the federal government to finally enforce the desegregation of interstate travel, and she co-founded the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, helping create a youth-led model of organizing that movements still use today. Later, she played a central role in the Selma voting rights movement and the Alabama Voting Rights Project, efforts that helped lead to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Diane Nash didn't just participate in history, she changed how people understood who could lead and how ordinary people acting together could force the nation to live up to its own laws.
So next we wanted to cover Bernice King, so a name you all know. But Bernice King grew up carrying a name that we all recognize. She was a child when her father was assassinated, and she inherited not just grief, but a public legacy, one the country was eager to soften. And she could have let that legacy just become something comfortable, something symbolic or easy to celebrate without requiring change. But instead, she spent her life doing something harder. She has consistently reminded people, often very directly, that Dr. King wasn't just about unity and love in the abstract, that he talked about economic injustice, about militarism. He talked about systems designed to exclude and exploit. And Bernice King refuses to let those parts of his message be erased, even when it makes people uncomfortable. She's pushed back when her father's words are quoted without context, and she's challenged institutions that want the dream without the disruption. She said in different ways over and over again, you don't get to celebrate the dream if you reject the demands. Bernice King doesn't create holidays, but she insists that remembrance comes with responsibility. And because of that insistence, Dr. King's legacy remains not just something we honor, but something that still asks something of us.
And Nicole Hannah Jones, bringing it into the 21st century. Nicole Hannah Jones is one of the leading thought shapers of what some of us call the new civil rights era, and the leading creator of the 1619 Project for the New York Times. Born in 1976, she developed a passion for journalism early, reading newspapers as a child and learning to question the stories America tells about itself. Through the 1619 Project, Hannah Jones didn't just revisit history, she reframed it. She argued that slavery was not a tragic footnote, but a foundational force still shaping American democracy. Her work earned wide recognition, including a Pulitzer Prize, but its real impact came from how it changed public language. She has helped shift conversations about race, democracy, and reparations from individual bias to structural design. She framed reparations not as charity or guilt, but as repair for intergenerational theft. By describing reparations as repairing a broken social contract, she moved the conversation from moral discomfort to political work. And because of this work, questions once dismissed as radical are now debated in classrooms, city councils, and legislatures. Nicole Hannah Jones didn't rewrite the Constitution, but she changed how many people understand it and what they believe democracy should be accountable for. I've been having a hard time sleeping, y'all. I wake up with this feeling that I'm on a plane and there's a screaming human who will not stop in the front row, in the row in front of me. The feeling of claustrophobia and despair descends upon me. A feeling that if I did what I wanted to do, the unthinkable disaster would certainly ensue. So I breathe, I sit on my cushion, and I meditate. I meditate on fear, and I meditate on the fact that fear is a tool of the oppressor, and that these women who certainly had fear did not let it rule them. We must find ways every day to transmute our fear into holy rage. We must find ways, and it starts with looking and knowing deeply that democracy and the civil rights that come with it are not spectator sports, that there is much to prepare for. For me, my ability to move forward relies on my willingness to witness the fear and move through it, rather than shove it under the nearest rug with distractions of television or audiobooks or food. Let us join these women in their bravery, in their courage and tenacity. Let us believe now more than ever that this democracy and the civil rights attached to it are worth getting creative for, worth fighting for in the ways that keep our spirits buoyant and our minds nimble. What does it look like to move past I don't know what to do and toward I am committed to learning and resourcing and acting? If democracy is something living, something fragile, then it needs tending. So today, identify one small, real thing you can do, one way you can use your voice, your time, or your resources, and then commit to returning to that choice again tomorrow, not as saviors, not as bystanders, but as people who understand that change is not carried by a few, it is sustained by many. Thank you for your time.